What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, December 20th edition of the NBA Lineup Generator video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. We have a 10-game NBA slate tonight that is really lacking in value, so it should be pretty interesting to walk through it using the Lineup Generator for DraftKings and FanDuel. Take a look at what we're getting to right now. We can talk through some of the value plays and what may or may not change by the time we get to lock. But first, make sure that you like this video, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, also subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you get an alert when our shows go live. We are going to start on the DraftKings side. As usual, I'm going to choose contrarian lineups here, but if you use this tool on your own, you do have the ability to choose to see all types of lineups, only chalky lineups, more balanced lineups, or only contrarian lineups. What you choose should be determined by the types of contests that you're playing. Also, to some extent, the stakes that you're playing. The lower stakes tournaments, in general, you can get away with some chalkier lineups just because the fields aren't going to be as good. But for this video, I'm going to choose contrarian lineups. Then you have the option to lock in a player. I don't recommend doing this if you're playing a lot of lineups, but if you're playing one or two, it certainly can save you some time. If you know that there's somebody that you want in all of your lineups, you'll only be presented with lineups that have that player. But I'm going to skip it for this video. And then I'm going to save the first 20 lineups that we get. But as you can see here, looking at these lineups, you are presented with an individual lineup. You can see the salary, the projected fantasy points, the projected ownership, each individual player and their projected numbers, their salary, their fantasy points, and their ownership. But then down here at the bottom, you also have two sliding scales, one for projection, one for ownership. And this is really useful because just knowing a lineup's fantasy point projection or its ownership projection doesn't matter all that much because it's going to change by how many games are on a slate, how many teams are shorthanded on that slate. It's all relative to everything else that's happening. So these sliding scales are really useful. You can see how the particular lineup compares to the alternatives. So you can see this one does project well, and it's leaning contrarian. Definitely not a chalky lineup here at all. And then you just save the lineup if you like it. You discard it if you don't. You do also have the ability to customize these lineups on a player-by-player basis. So if you were to look at a lineup like this one, and you mostly like it, but you don't like Terry Rozier for whatever reason, you can click the arrows over here on the right, and it's going to show you every point guard option that you have. You can scroll down. You see you have $200 left over in salary. So you need somebody that is $9,100 or less. You could scroll down, compare him to Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, Tyler Hero. Clearly, in this case, from a fantasy projection, Terry Rozier is better. So this isn't a swap that I would probably want to make. But if for whatever reason you did, maybe Fred VanVleet, you can click the arrows here and it'll swap VanVleet in. You can obviously do that with more than one player as well. So you could swap Rozier down to somebody cheaper and then swap up Jalen Smith or Trendon Watford if there's, you don't like one of those guys. So it does give you the ability, to get, if you're presented with a lineup that you mostly like, you do have the easy ability to swap in players that you prefer over the ones that you maybe don't necessarily like quite as much. But I'm going to save the first 20 and we can take a look at player exposures. And this is probably going to be a little bit weirder. Player exposures here are a little bit more weird than they normally are. That's because we are waiting on injury news today. And right now we just don't have a lot of value. So we have players that are not projected that well, just showing up as good plays because they're not really popular and they allow us to round out our lineups. This is a perfect example of a slate where I would want to pay a lot of attention to the actual exposures that I'm getting. Clearly, it can be difficult when you're saving your 20 lineups to mentally keep track of how much you have of each individual player. But getting 90% Jalen Smith, for example, he's questionable today. That's its own separate thing. Miles Turner is also questionable. So obviously the Indiana front court could change quite a bit. But even if Jalen Smith is back, we really don't know how many minutes he's going to play. Isaiah Jackson has played well in his absence. We don't know if Indiana is going to elect to play them alongside each other. We don't know if Jalen Smith's going to just take all the minutes from Isaiah Jackson. We don't know if they're going to split the backup minutes. So he's somebody that, right now, early in the day, we have a very low ownership projection on Smith, but we have him projected also to be the backup center. So this is something where if you're using this tool closer to lock, you probably won't get this sort of issue anyway, because those numbers are going to balance out. We're going to have a better idea of exactly how the slate looks. So this is partly an issue that is coming up just because it's early in the afternoon. But if you do run into a situation like this where you're like, okay, well, this guy makes some sense. Jalen Smith clearly has upside, but I don't need 90% of my lineups to have him because he's extremely risky as well. If you click his name, he will turn yellow on the right-hand side, and it's going to highlight all of the lineups that have him on the left-hand side. You can then delete the lineups, remove the lineups that you like the least, and manipulate, adjust his exposures that way. So, for example, if you have 20, you delete 4, that's going to get 20% of your lineups removed. Then you can go down to get more lineups and simply select lineups that do not have him to replace the ones that you got rid of. And you can adjust your overall exposures that way. If you get to a situation where you've selected lineups, but you realize that you're not comfortable with the amount of a specific player that you have, you will then also, so you can see here, he went from 90% to 70. I mean, again, this won't pop up for you closer to lock, but I would want less than 70 also. But for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to take the time to do that. You do also want to pay attention, if you do that though, to the consequences of, to unrelated players. Javon Carter, for example, went from 20 or 25% up to 40. He's another very cheap guy that projects for like 15 fantasy points that I don't want a lot of either. So if this were close to lock and these were lineups I'm playing, I'd spend some time here, trying to lower these exposures. But like I said, this is in part because I'm recording this video earlier in the day. Ownership isn't exactly matched up with the way that we have these guys projected. But if you do find yourself in a situation where, whether it's cheap guys like this, or it's just saying, oh, I have 80% Trae Young and I don't want to tie that much money into Trae Young, then you can very easily adjust your lineups that way. You also, of course, could just highlight them and then go in here and use the arrows to swap out, Jalen Smith, for example, like I showed you before as well. So you do have easy customization options if you're getting to a spot where you don't necessarily want as much of a player as you're getting. But ignoring those guys at the top, we do get some normal plays showing up after that. Isaiah Hartenstein, 5,800, playing without Jericho Sims. Remains to be seen if he starts or comes off the bench. He did start the second half last game after Sims was injured. The Knicks have preferred to bring him off the bench, so it is possible that we just get a Taj Gibson spot start. Gibson plays like 12, 13 minutes, and Hartenstein plays a lot off the bench. But either way, Hartenstein's going to look good here. Buddy Hield is showing up as a good option in what should be a high-scoring game between the Pacers and Hornets. He's 5,800, shooting guard, small forward. And again, we just don't have a lot of value today, which is going to push us into this 5 to 6K range, as you can see here with Hartenstein, Buddy Hield, Norm Powell, who, by the way, is questionable with an illness. $5,400 Dylan Brooks, 25% as well. We're getting to 25% Paolo Banchero, who looks like a pretty good contrarian play. We are getting up to Luka 20% of the time at 12,200. He's averaged about 40 minutes per game in the games without Kyrie Irving. This season, not a great matchup for him, but if you can get to him, great. And that is another reason that we're seeing so much Jalen Smith, Javon Carter. As those guys come down, you probably will lose a bit of Luka. Same goes for Dallin Terry, just not somebody that I'm actually going to end up playing most likely. But with the way things are currently projected early in the afternoon, he shows up. That can also be said for Trendon Watford. Jabari Smith looks like an actual good play from Houston at 6,100. Cameron Johnson looks good at 5,800 from the Nets. So what's really standing out to me right now from a DraftKings standpoint, it's not the specific names that we're getting to, Jalen Smith, Javon Carter, Dallin Terry, Trendon Watford. I don't think any of those guys are going to end up being actual real plays on this slate once we get more news and once we get ownership updated. But it is showing you just how thin the cheap value is and how much you're going to have to sacrifice to get to somebody like Luka or to get to Jokic or Embiid. And then the other thing that stands out is just how useful that 5 to 6K range is as a result, where you see Hartenstein, Hield, Powell, Brooks, Jabari Smith, Cameron Johnson, all in that price range, showing up as some of our highest owned players. So overall, it just looks like a slate where you're probably going to end up being more balanced in terms of salary, unless we start getting guys ruled out, unless, Donovan Mitchell gets ruled out, Paul George, Norm Powell. Those guys are all questionable. So we do have big name pieces that are questionable that could open up some cheaper value. But for right now, it looks like a slate where if you are trying to get more stars and scrubs, you're going to be playing some really questionable dudes. Otherwise, you're probably going to be living more in this balanced range. And now we can go take a look at FanDuel, where things generally look a little bit differently because their pricing isn't as tight. Again, clearly pricing extremely tight on DraftKings today. But before we get into FanDuel, if you are looking to use this tool for yourself, which I highly recommend, sign up using the link in the description below on YouTube or in the tweet below on Twitter. It's $14.95 per week. And we created this tool with lower volume, lower stakes, single entry, 3 max, 20 max type players in mind, because it can be very difficult to improve at DFS and make money, because a lot of data and tools are so expensive. If you're not playing mid stakes or high stakes, it can put you in a hole that even if you are using good tools, it's tough to climb out of. So we created this tool that is utilizing our player projections, ownership projections, simulation models, all of our data on the back end, and then presenting you with the final result, which is quality lineups that we project to be profitable in the long run. So you still get access to all of those tools. You don't have all of the features and customization options that you get for the more expensive packages, but you also don't necessarily need that for single entry, 3 max, 20 max. And this is at a price point that'll make it a lot easier for you to sustainably profit and eventually move up to those more expensive tools if you wish to do so. Now we're going to take a look at the FanDuel side. I'm again going to choose contrarian lineups and not lock anybody in. And I'm going to save the first 20 here and see how our exposures look, hopefully a little bit more appealing than they did on the DraftKings side. At the top, we have Isaiah Hartenstein. He has power forward eligibility here, so he is going to look really good at 6,400. Jalen Smith, 3,900. Again, the same issues that I talked about on DraftKings apply. He is only 3,900 here, but still wouldn't want 60% if this were lock. Also pretty sure that you won't be getting 60% at lock because of news and ownership adjusting. Patrick Williams at 5,700 showing up 45% of the time. Dwight Powell, only 3,800, should be starting for Dallas tonight, most likely. He has power forward eligibility, which is nice as well, so he's showing up. It's a little bit easier to get to Luka on FanDuel because of more value options, softer pricing. $6,500 Drew Holiday looks very good. We're getting the Miles Bridges here in a good matchup against Indiana. He has struggled this year, hasn't been as productive as expected, especially without LaMelo Ball, but he is $700 less on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. That is generally a sign that somebody's a little bit underpriced. Although, in the case of Bridges, he is pretty clearly overpriced on DraftKings. So I'd say he's more like correctly priced on FanDuel, but makes for a reasonable contrarian option. Brandon Miller at 5,800 looks like a good value. Tyler Hero, $1,200 less than he is on FanDuel. He looks better, at least on FanDuel, than DraftKings, showing up 25% of the time. Mikal Bridges, fairly priced at 7,500. Donovan Mitchell, I mentioned a minute ago, is questionable, but if he goes, he does have a good matchup tonight against his former Utah team. He is playing huge minutes without Darius Garland. 6 games this year without Garland. Mitchell has exceeded 36 minutes in 5 of them. In the 2 most recent, he's played at least 40 minutes in regulation in both of them. So if he is able to go tonight, he does look like one of the better payoff options. Really like getting to him at 10-2 if he's in. And then Gordon Hayward, another player from that Charlotte, Indiana game that looks very appealing at 6,800, showing up 25% of the time as well. So that's all I have for you today. Again, this is a slate with a lot of moving parts. I never recommend taking lineups from this video that I'm recording in the afternoon and playing them at night. I absolutely don't recommend it on this slate because it is going to look entirely different. I do recommend signing up using the link below to use this tool for yourself closer to lock so you can take full advantage of it. Other than that, thank you for watching the video and good luck on your lineups tonight.